Sabeth Fitzgibbons. I'm the rector at Trinity Parish in Seattle. And
I'm Julia McCray Goldsmith, and it is really delightful. I have met and re-met a few friends here and hope to meet many more. I am recently retired as the Dean of the Cathedral in San Jose, California.
that one. This is you.
You get to do that. I think we need to figure out the choreography here. So I want to begin with yet another get to know you activity, but here it's going to be a little bit quieter in just groups of two, or if three is easier for you, that will work. But I want to pose a couple questions as we enter into this period of time where we'll discern who's in our congregation and what will help them to engage. Let's start with ourselves and each other. How do you observe generosity in your community? And assuming there were a newcomer coming to your community, how would you articulate your community generosity? Have fun. Intentionally so. Intentionally big. If you want to focus it on money, don't feel shy at all. But we want to start with an ample word to describe all the ways in which we give and receive gifts. So how do you see it? How would you talk about it to someone else? And find, ideally, a partnership of two, but three will work if that's what your table is configured as. And we'll give that about 3 minutes. Going to be bumping up against each other.
Yeah, I do too. We'll move our chair onto that side.
Yeah. It doesn't require that we have to sit. I might sit. Okay, I love a group. I love a group that talks loud and fast and covers a lot of ground. And I'm going to invite you to bring your conversations back in, up. We'll have lots more time to talk in this session. But just quickly, did anybody hear anything that surprised them? Anything new? Ways of articulating generosity that kind of got you excited or got you thinking in new ways? Yes?
We had somebody at our table that made a really strong connection between invitation and generosity.
Ooh. Nice. Yeah.
A lot with the invitation stuff, but I've never,
Yeah.
it fits my experience, but I never put that together before.
That is why we are here inviting your collective wisdom today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Well, I think it's what you were saying, because I can't hear all that well, but don't tell my husband. But we have that big welcoming sign as you walk in the door, and we were talking about that. It's very crafted, open and affirming to all people.
Yep.
Right? We decided that was generosity. Totally aside from, we used to have a parishioner who's now out in Denver. These are whoever the Denver people are, but she, before you even walked in the door, you were with Lynn, and Lynn was introducing you to 5 different people, and, who was that person. So I did it out of the obnoxious Lynn wasn't, so that we should all channel our Lynn.
So one of the messages I'm getting right now that I hope all of you will carry forward through this conversation, and we will do a lot of conversation, but from this piece of the conversation is that generosity does begin with the very first contact. And hence our stewardship begins with the very first impression we have. And of course, our first impression begins here. So let us open our session with prayer. Wise and loving God, you bear us for joy. In humility, you show us wisdom. Enfold us in this hour with the knowledge born of love. Awaken within us the desire to know rightly and the will to live justly with grace and generosity. Amen.
Just a quick overview of what we are thinking about for this session. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of choosing effective tools. In our first session, we heard about some best practices for our toolboxes, and we also all bring some level of experience with different kinds of tools for engaging people in stewardship. And so we're going to talk about what makes tools effective, and part of that is who we're talking to, who our constituents are. And so then we're going to dive into that and think a little bit about who are we talking to in our congregations, and hopefully bring some different dimensions that you might not have considered before. Talk about people's motivations for giving as another piece of that. And through this all, we are hoping that there will be points for conversation as well as to pause and think about your congregation, your constituents, through some different lenses. So that is our hope and desire. So to get us started, thinking about the information that Davey and Amy shared this morning, was there a tool in there that was new to you or that you find particularly exciting, and how do you anticipate using it? This is a discuss with a partner at your table. Ready, set, go. Bill, go ahead and discuss with people at your table, and then we'll have a little sharing.
You have. Yeah.
When you give it the first one,
Yeah. Yeah, okay. We will flow. Had a lot of fun at that table.
"30 seconds. I give you about 30 seconds.
I don't have the Gong app on my phone anymore. It went away.
My alarm has a chicken cry.
Let's huddle up, folks, and hear from each other.
All right, we're going to hear from 3 tables. Friends, what great conversations. The Lord be with you. All right, I'd like to hear from 3 different tables about something, a tool that you are excited about. Yes, please.
We spoke about making stewardship not just a. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sure. So we spoke about stewardship not being just a particular time of year that we're trying to get through, right? It's something that we should do year round. Oh, okay. So we had talked about stewardship not being just a set time of the year, right? Just we've got to get through these 6 weeks, right? It's something that we do the entire year, and as Chris pointed out, it's not something that we start off with a negative connotation like, it's stewardship time again, right? I know nobody wants to do it, right? It's you gotta keep the energy flowing and make it, something that somebody's interested in doing and not just feels that they have to do.
Thank you. So those weekly, the prospect of having those weekly/monthly inserts to be able to spark those conversations and to give an opportunity for dialogue and mindset.
Yep.
That.
Okay, so that's a tool, the reflections. Another table, sure, coming your way. Please stand up and.
So Chris may tell me that we already do this because I haven't noticed. But one of the things that made a lot of sense to me was having one of those QR codes in the pew so that if somebody wants to just zap it with their phone for the what they put instead of in the offering plate, they can. So
It's in the worship bulletin.
I thought that was just for prayers.
Super. Thank you. Using a QR code to access giving, the offering plate.
Anyone else we haven't heard from yet? All right.
This came out from somebody else in our talking group, but we were talking about it as, instead of calling it Pledge Week or Stewardship Week, they called it a season of invitation. And the idea about turning it more into inviting people to giving, I really like that, so.
All of which models for us, there are so many good ways to do this. And the good way is the one that engages your heart as the inviter, because you're going to invite with power and passion and conviction.
And I'm going to skip that question about tools that didn't fit your context because we all discern those. So how do you know if a tool is right for your congregation or your context? And that's what we're going to talk about. Research data tells us that different groups of people, also intuition, tells us that different groups of people respond to different kinds of invitation to generously share their time and wisdom and money. And thus, not every tool will work as effectively in every context. There is not a one-size-fits-all stewardship program. And engagement itself is always a tool. Our goal is to engage people's hearts and minds in generosity. And so figuring out how we meet people where they're at and invite them in to this journey of learning and growing in generosity is what we're talking about.
You know, I think that it's clear to me that those of you in the room could, between yourselves, teach this entire workshop. And it became especially clear in our last breakout session when I was somehow assigned to the veterans, where I felt very humble. But what the veterans did talk about was all engagement, is the personal relationships. Yesterday, when our board was meeting, somebody used a beautiful phrase about we at TENS, I'm not going to get the language exactly right, but I'll try, Dina. We develop the paper, you develop the people, develop the givers. And so if we do nothing else for you today, let us help you refine your tools, sharpen your tools, use your paperwork well, with the goal that you're freed up to develop your people. So who do you have amongst your people? Sabeth, did you want to talk about this or did I? We could do it either way. I'm standing here with the microphone. We've done a lot of this together for a lot of times. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but your parishes are diverse. Our Church Universal is diverse. We're diverse in terms of age and generations, our cultures and ethnicities. Our regional culture is different. I cannot figure out what it means to order a pop. I will never get that right. It's so embedded in me that it's a soda. And that's a sort of a silly example, but I assure you, in terms of our conversation about deep values, about generosity, about connectiveness, we're also using language that's a little bit regionally specific, which is an invitation to listen more deeply. We are very specific in terms of our economic status and how that affects our thinking about generosity, our employment status, and never to be discounted, our tenure in the church. I'm guessing many of you have had this experience, but boy, I have been struck as a dean and rector by how my language and teaching needs to be adapted to folks who are newer to church. Because they're not talking about pop or soda, they're talking about LaCroix. And I need to learn what language they're using. And then, of course, we need to remember that we have folks in our congregation who have no prior experience with church and or are immigrants or refugees from other cultures. So what do we do with this? Because our historic ways, tools for engagement, the kinds of things, the paper that exists to be a good friend, a good partner for you with, don't work equally well with all of these constituents. So I want you to make a note. If you have a piece of paper in front of you, that would be great, or you can make a mental note. But I'd like you to sort of, if you'd bear with me, make a stick figure. Want to make a stick figure for me, Sabeth? And actually, I'd like you to make 4 or 5 stick figures. You don't need to do anything with them yet, but I'd like you to be thinking about people in your congregation whose generosity you don't know about yet, whose patterns of giving, whose deep relationships, whose connectedness and commitments you might not know about yet. I can tell you about someone in my congregation. I've been ministering in a bicultural, bilingual context for quite a while, and I didn't know anything about Roman and the way that he gave until I met his daughter, a teenage daughter, I think she's about 18, who's in the midst of cancer treatment. And that's where his generosity was going right now. And the entire extended family generosity was going right now. Deeply generous person, but the way that he practiced his generosity was not particularly visible to me using traditional stewardship tools. Didn't mean he wasn't a generous person. It did mean I couldn't see it with the lens I was wearing. So I kind of want to encourage you to see your multiple constituents with new eyes. What moves them? What holds their heart? What are they invested in? So just make your 5 stick figures. If you can think of a few different names to put on them, people you'd like to know more about, please do that. We won't necessarily stop at this point, but we will return to these people. And if you can't think of 5, 3 is good, 1 is good. But somebody you'd like to know more about. Which leads me into the question of culture. So Beth and I are going to use the language of culture in a very ample way. Sometimes we think about it as different language groups, different ethnicities, but I want to use culture in the sense of everything that gives us an identity, and we usually have more than one identity amongst a group of people. So it would be values, celebrations, attitudes toward giving, that are rooted in the lives and experiences, both of our own ancestors and are also the places we came from and the particular celebrations and patterns that we honor. It's woven into every assumption we make, but often not visible, particularly, again, if we're not wearing the right kind of lenses to see it. And I want to pause briefly as someone who's worked in a very multicultural context. I come from Northern California. San Jose is one of the most diverse cities in the United States. And I could reliably assume that I was pretty much not understanding almost all of the cultures in my congregation almost all of the time. But what helped me to find my way around that rich and complex, sometimes opaque landscape was a principle that that one of the sort of grandfathers of intercultural communication gave us, Edward D. Hall, who talked about low and high context cultures. I'm not going to, that would be another semester's course, but I'm going to set up a framing between relational or transactional communication. It's a very rough shorthand, but in the States, for the most part, those of us of Western European descent, in the States and Western Europe now, we tend to say, like, I'm going to tell you a thing, you hear a thing happens, right? But in your case, nothing happens if you don't check it out with grandma first. Nothing at all. Or nothing happens if it happens while we're preparing for the celebration of La Virgen de Guadalupe. So in what's called a higher context culture, there's a whole lot of background that probably isn't seen or heard, but it's absolutely relevant to what we're doing. So I want you to just keep that simple framing in mind. Is the communication you're having when you hand someone a pledge card, is that saying a thing, hearing a thing, and doing a thing? Or is there a lot more background and a lot more relationship behind that that's going to be necessary for a thing to happen? So with that in mind, you might add a note or two to your stick figures if they pertain to a particular culture. Give you some specific examples from communities I've worked with. On the whole, Black Americans and later generation immigrants from anywhere in the world, folks who are somewhat acculturated, or in many cases highly acculturated, to U.S. patterns of communication, often the most inspiring conversation we can have about stewardship has to do with pride of place and continuity of the culture. Continuing celebrations of Absalom Jones or Virgin of Guadalupe, if our church does those things, then that is a celebration to steward. For First Nations and Indigenous people, often the ways that our church honor land tenure and legacies and notice treaties and betrayals are very meaningful ways of being church, of articulating the gospel, and help us to make the bridge to a conversation about generosity. And in a community I know quite well, but I've made every possible mistake with Latinos and first-generation immigrants, we have a particular challenge of the unfamiliarity of pledging as a communications tool. However, we also have the opportunity rooted in preservation of family and festivals, very high value to recent immigrants. I'm going to add, though, that in many ways, our younger and unchurched folks behave the same way, too. Unfamiliarity of pledging, and we're going to have to go out and figure out what their festivals are. I have this fabulous young adult community in my congregation whose festivals seem to involve a lot of bowling. And, if I show up at the bowling place, I am honoring the way that they are a community. So I want you to start noticing those things in your stick figures. What are they valuing? What makes meaningful community for them? And perhaps most importantly, when in doubt, go ask. Build deeper relationships. Ask people exactly these questions. What's meaningful to you? What makes church home, community to you? What honors your deep values? That way we begin to understand the multiple constituencies in our congregation. Look at her go. Exactly, only if Grandma says yes. Thank you, Sabeth. Right.
Culture. It's culture. I have lived in 4 different parts of the country and been in ministry in 3 of them. And I can tell you that there is a difference from being in Boston to being in Erie, Pennsylvania, to being in Seattle. How you ask the questions, what things are called, the assumptions that are made. I can tell you a very funny cultural story on me. Having moved from the Boston area to be in Erie, as we approached our first fall, Thanksgiving, I'm sitting with the treasurer who would give me information. And she says, I said, so Thanksgiving weekend is coming up. And she says, don't forget, Monday's off. And I was like, Monday after Thanksgiving is a school holiday. Is this travel time, like to get home from Grandma's house? And she says, seriously? I said, yeah, what? She said, it's opening day of deer season. Oh, okay. There is a cultural difference, not something I had encountered in my life before, but this was part of the fabric of that community and quite possibly part of the fabric of many of yours. Right. Not something we do at least not in Boston, not in the part of Washington State I live in. So you never know. And it is those postures of curiosity that help us learn more. All right, so sort of goes where I'm talking about. One dimension of culture and the underlying assumptions that we make has to do with economics. And we often talk about that in terms of employment status. Is somebody working? Do they work full-time, part-time? Do they do seasonal work? Some of us may have portions of our communities who are seasonal workers. Are they not working? And what does that mean? Is somebody unemployed? Are they disabled? Are they not working or working part-time by choice? Because they're raising children, because they're caring for a parent? I mean, that can be a choice. Are they a student or retired or something else? All of these affect how people sometimes feel about themselves, as well as their sense of generosity and what they can contribute to a community. And how we ask them, invite them to be generous. Right, economic status can have many emotional impacts. So that is something to understand as we are engaging people, asking them to respond. And although we don't often talk about economics and employment status overtly in big groups, in our congregations, there is an unspoken root there of power differential, right? People who work, people who make money, people who make more money often have more voice, more influence, more power in our communities. And that is worth acknowledging and asking ourselves, how do we invite all people to feel respected, loved, engaged, that their faithful response, faithful and generous response is equal. This is also, we want to talk theology for a minute. This is about the body of Christ. Just a couple weeks ago, we heard from 1 Corinthians 12, right? The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. The hand cannot say to the foot, I have no need of you. We are all important members of the body of Christ. We all have something vital to contribute, to grow together. So that is to say that giving is not only about money. Am I next? Economics. Skip. Oh, I'm doing it generation. Skipping that one.
Actually, can I borrow
Oh.
and tell a story just quickly?
Yeah, can I? Yeah, okay, yeah.
I'm reminded of a story in my congregation, one of the many where I sort of miscued. It was one of the worst vestry meetings of my professional ministry career. And that's saying something, because I run a tight vestry meeting. You know, we have time targets, we get our business done, I've got everything sort of figured out in advance. I have few surprises. I had some surprises here. And it involved a significant gift that went unseen. It's the first time our vestry convened bilingually and biculturally. And we were about to make a significant capital investment in renovating the on-site sexton's apartment. And somebody in the congregation, the English-speaking congregation, had given a significant capital gift that would almost certainly cover the cost. And we started talking about that and how much of this gift to allocate and what bids we'd gotten from the contractors. And one of the Latino members in the congregation said in Spanish, you know, my cousins can do this in a weekend. You probably can imagine what happened. But the communication totally broke down. The junior warden was a young and very careful rule-following engineer and didn't really want informal sector folks fixing up the apartment. So for him, it became a question of compliance. And then there were other people for whom it was a question of the cost. In the end, this substantially generous gift that would have engaged quite a few members of our Spanish-speaking community wasn't accepted. Yeah. So that's my invitation to you to notice the generous ways that people act and make sure there's a way for their gift to be received. I have a native Spanish-speaking associate, and he did a smart thing. He caught the guy after the fact who'd made the offer and said, you know, we have an upstairs bathroom that really needs some help as well. Because he knew it wasn't so much about how we got the apartment renovated, but how the Spanish-speaking members of the community could be respected in the gifts they were best able to give.
Right. And feel valued. What caused it to be withdrawn?
It wasn't withdrawn. The senior and junior warden wouldn't accept it. They were worried that it wouldn't meet codes, which actually we didn't, it's too many details. We didn't even have to pull permits anyway because of the scope of the work, but we didn't know that, and people got anxious. But the same group of people did some great work on the bathroom, so it's okay. Gifts got used. But we didn't see them at first.
Right. The gift was, because it wasn't kind of it wasn't money, and it wasn't what was expected by the dominant culture in the room, it wasn't seen at first blush. Right? And thus not received for the generosity that was being extended. Right. Another dimension of culture is age. And in the Episcopal Church, we often slant toward the biggest group in the room, which tends to be on the older end of the age spectrum. And so I want to talk for a minute about the 8 living generations that we currently have in the United States and Canada, North America. We call folks who are 98 and older. Does anybody here have someone in their late 90s in their congregation? You're right, late 90s plus. Yes. Let's hear it for longevity. They are the last of the greatest generation. I'm going to skim through these and then circle back. Silence. Those are the folks who are 79 or 80 to their 96, 97-year-olds. Some of them are very vital. Baby boomers, ages 60 to 79. Gen X, 45 to 60. Gen Y, also known as millennials, 29 to 44. Gen Z, 15 to 28. Alphas, 1 to 14. And then this year, we start a new generation. They're going to be the betas. How many generations are in your congregation? Does anybody have all 8 living generations active in their congregation? I do. Sort of. No betas. All right, 7 of the 8. Who's got 6 of the 8? Good. Who's missing if you have 6? The ends. Yep, okay. Who's got 5? Maybe I should turn it around. Is anybody missing more than 3 living generations in their congregation? Wow, I found that hopeful. Where do you find yours weighted? Do you find yours weighted on the older end? Yep. Does anybody find their congregation weighted on the younger end? Yay, Deborah. Yeah, church planter, yeah. Anybody else? Yours is? That's exciting. In the middle. Yes. You have Gen X in your congregation. That's fabulous. Cool. I just heard somebody say they're missing the younger adult generations. That's not surprising. Yep. Right, so this is another way to think about our congregations. All right, now I want to circle back and give you a little bit more detail. And while I'm saying this, I want to tell you that TENS has a whole webinar on generational giving. So I'm going to go through some of this, which is not on the screen, and then also direct you that if you want more details, you should visit the TENS website and our webinar library, and maybe sign up to attend one. So I'm going to start with the silent generation. Those who are in the greatest generation have probably already made their end-of-life provisions, and as somebody wisely told me, once you're past a certain age threshold, most people don't go back and change their wills. So thank them, love them. So for the silent generation, those who are 80 plus, mostly retired. Some of them are still working. They're about 5% of the U.S. population. Two things that they very much value are personal communication and traditional forms of communication, like direct mail and phone calls, stamps and phone calls. They tend to give out of a feeling of civic responsibility or duty, and very much care about taking care of neighbors in need, like taking care of people who don't have enough. They tend to give, well, first of all, they tend to write checks. They give bequests and leave legacy gifts. They are pledgers. This is a group that pledges. This is part of that civic responsibility. And also the group that potentially can give from a end-of-year retirement distribution or a regular distribution out of a retirement account, right? Because that's... the baby boomers are about 20% of the U.S. population. They are just retiring, right? These are young retireds. But in that we see, as people leave their working lives, we often see a decrease in their giving as they move to less, what am I trying to say? Less income. Yes, less income. It stabilizes, but less than they probably had during their working lives. They really like direct mail with a link, right? They might be able to use the computer, but also phone calls, texts, emails, some social media, Facebook. Thinking of my parents here. They can be great volunteers when we think about all the different ways that we're asking people to be generous. These are folks, especially I have young retirees who are like, I don't know what to do with myself. Come to church. Here, let me tell you about all the things that you could do with yourself. What do you love to do? What's your skill set? They enjoy fundraising events. There's a social dimension there. Digital campaigns work with them, and especially matching gifts. Right? And why? Why do they give? To make their community stronger, to build partnerships, and to give back because they have gained, benefited. The whys are important. They help us know what language to use, how to make that ask or invitation. Gen X. We are 20% of the U.S. population, and pardon me, Canadian friends, for saying U.S. over and over again. High values for Gen X are volunteerism. We like to receive our information, our invitations by text and phone call, social media, and email. I'm going to tell you, I hate the telephone, so don't call me. I probably won't answer it. And are much more likely to give online through a digital platform, fundraising events, social events for good cause. The why is really, again, slightly different. For community engagement, we want to engage with the communities. We are pragmatic. Show me it works. Don't tell me, show me, and I'm going to make my own decision, thanks. Just because my parents said it was a good thing doesn't mean I'm going to investigate that and find out more. Transparency is important. I want to know where those dollars are going. Impact in the community, and particularly environment, education, and children's welfare, which makes sense. Millennials, Gen Y, Again, about 20% of the population. These are younger working adults. We sometimes in the Episcopal Church still call them young adults, which some of them find quite entertaining, especially the ones who are at the top end in their 40s. You call me a young adult. Yeah, they are. They are also, this is the group, I have a lot of millennials in my congregation. My vestry is mostly millennials. It's really great, and they are busy working people. You got to get that invitation at just the right time for the thing that works for them. It's not that they don't want to, it's that life has a lot going on between work and kids and all of the other social things they do. They value a cause more than an organization. You might have discovered this already. Unless they grew up in a faith tradition that relied on pledging, they're more interested in giving to a thing that you're doing. They like peer-to-peer asks, because I'm going to tell Chris how great this thing is and ask if he will join me in going to this event where we're going to raise money for something. That's the one-to-one. Social networking, you're going to catch them by text, not by email. Most of them read so many emails at work, the last thing they want to do is go home and read another email. I have vestry members who say, don't send me an email. Just send me a text or get on the WhatsApp string and send me a note, or social media, though, yeah, maybe not Facebook. Right? You got to go to the next generations of social media, right? Instagram. Discord, although Discord is also younger, is the next ones, the Gen Zs as well. Millennials they want to give online. They're the ones who love a QR code. Monthly giving, they do. They will sign up. Tell me about how to get my employer's matching program. Get the church registered with my employer's matching program so my dollars will go twice as far. So if you haven't figured out that and you have employers in your community that do workplace matching, it's worth figuring out how to get into their program. And make the volunteering easy for these folks. They have busy schedules. Can I show up for an hour? Yes. Here's what we're doing. Impact of what they're doing, social responsibility, and personal connection with causes are all highly important. All right, Gen Z, these are the youngest adults. Think teenagers through just after college. So you can imagine that social media is important. They do virtual events. Again, they're going to give by the same online QR codes, the combination of action and money together, if I can do both, because a lot of times these folks have more time and energy than cash to give. And they want to make an impact. They are particularly focused on the planet, people, and inclusion. Right? The alphas and the betas appeal to their parents. Oh, yep, one more. Go ahead.
It occurs to me that most of those people don't use email anymore. Old people, because they're afraid of scams, there's so many scams.
True.
They don't know what's true or not. I mean, mine's so littered with weird advertisements for
Yeah.
Ozempic and stuff. And then the young people don't even, like you said, they either have so much at work, or they just don't even.
Yep.
You ask them, do you have the Yahoo? And they're like, well, I don't even.
Yes.
So I don't think it's the most effective. I think with our, newsletter, other people probably know this, but we might have 15 to 20% of people who read our newsletter. Exactly. So I don't know if you know.
Well, and I promise you, we are actually not going to give you a prescription. This is an invitation to recognize who's in your congregation and build deep enough relationships so that you can begin to see what's going to work for them. For an awful lot of people, it's going to matter a lot that they have a personal conversation. I think more and more that's the case as people come in with less church experience. And it doesn't all have to be the rector's responsibility. The vestry might want to sit down and start having conversations with people. How do we keep in touch with you best? What inspires you? What gives you hope? So we begin to practice that donor-centric model. I have a comment about Gen Alpha. So I am not a millennial. I am a boomer, and I have a granddaughter. Just pause. Best granddaughter ever. Right. That's the way it works. Exactly. I didn't grow up going to church, so it wasn't obvious to me how to train her, but we take her to church. And my husband, who did grow up in church, makes sure she has a quarter in her pocket every week. But, where can we learn those habits of generosity except in our churches? So we are doing a great favor to the whole philanthropic endeavor in North America. So take a quick look at the people you described, your stick people or anything else. Think about what their ages might be and what that means in terms of their patterns of giving, what they need to hear, what invitation is going to unlock their best generosity. And as came up so much in our conversation, what kind of communication will enable them to recognize that they're being invited into deeper connectedness and deeper significance. Some other things we might want to look at as we sort of break down our constituents, their church experience. Are they lifelong? Are they returning? Do they need to have a chance to relearn those skills and habits and practices? Are they new to the Anglican Church of Canada or the Episcopal Church? Are they refugees from other denominations, or like me, grew up completely unchurched and really needed some sit-down time to understand what this whole pledging thing was about? And that was using the language of pledging. There may be other ways that your folks need to hear an invitation to generosity. There's a term in the world of fundraising, of development, we don't use so often in church. Donor segmentation or donor relations, I think Kevin used earlier. And there is a little bit of concern about that maybe if we start breaking down our donors too carefully, like they're going to get different kinds of pastoral attention, maybe we don't want our rector to know how much they give. I want to invite you to invite your congregations to think about those donor relationships differently. Our job as church leaders is to invite people into deeper practices of discipleship. And our giving is one of our practices of discipleship. If we don't know what people's prior experience is, how to reach them, what the culture around them is encouraging them to do or not do, we are not growing their generous hearts, the generous hearts that God calls us all to have as disciples of Jesus Christ. When we think about church experience, we think about the variety of tools you heard about in the morning, who you have in your congregation. You may want to do a little mixing and matching when we have our breakout time here as to who needs what of the tools that TENS offers and you have for yourself. And also, what I can't say often enough, personal conversations. If I don't know why Roman is offering his cousins to update the sexton's apartment rather than giving an equivalent amount of money, which is a lot of money. It was $50,000 to do that renovation. If I don't know who he is and why he works that way, I'm missing his desire to live generously in the community. And as I mentioned before, most of the time, clergy really need to know what people are giving, not because we're going to love the wealthier people more. On the contrary, we may challenge the wealthier people more, which is a good thing to do. Let's see. Sabeth, we've got just a minute or two left. So you
That's
wanna...
fine. We do? Oh, we do. Okay. This slide is just circling back to younger givers, that millennials and Gen Z are the most racially diverse generations, and 43% are non-white, and that number is growing all the time. And so when leadership and worship leaders are monoracial, there's a disconnect with what people see and how they connect and what they experience. And so this is that invitation that as you think about leadership in your congregations and you think about wanting to engage younger adults in leadership, to think about broadening that invitation to all the diversity of cultural dimensions that we have talked about today and more. Who's there? How do we invite leadership that looks like the people that we want to include in our congregations and like the diversity of the body of Christ, which is all of us? Strategies. This is the pay attention, right? We're talking about strategies and acknowledging that, I think, was it Davey who said it earlier? The definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. Hey, what do we get? If we do the same thing, we get the same result. So this is just thinking about, when we think about the breadth of cultures and dimensions of our constituencies and the conversations that we have, that we may need to adjust from the same old if we are wanting to deepen our invitation for people to respond with the generosity that's in their hearts. Yes?
One of the reasons we don't adjust our strategies is that we're afraid to fail.
Yes, thank you.
And I think we have to be willing to fail.
Oh, yeah.
To just go ahead and take the risk, you know, and if it doesn't work, probably no one will die, right? Like but we tend to sort of, we're reticent and we tend to catastrophize, whereas sometimes if we just go ahead and take the risk, the payoffs can be there.
So you're 100% right, Michelle, and you are pointing out to me in my presentation a cultural difference from this part of the country to the Pacific Northwest and, dare I say, Northern California, where there are a lot of entrepreneurs who've taken a lot of risks, and the cultures there are less risk averse because you don't grow, you don't expand, you don't make your empire bigger. Hello, Microsoft. If you don't take risks, if you don't try something and make it okay to fail. And I will tell you that when I was in ministry in Pennsylvania, I came up against this, like, oh, but we can't do something different because what if, well, if we don't try something different, we won't know if it works. And we will always learn something. It's not failure if you learn something.
When I moved from Northern California, home of Facebook and Google and all that, and I went to the cathedral in Portland, Oregon, I kept talking about our new adventures as incubator spaces. And that would kind of get a blank look in about half the people, but it's Portland, Oregon. About half the people would say, oh, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're just trying something out. And just saying we're just trying this for a season or a month or whatever often can buy us some time. But you're absolutely right. And embedded in that fear of failure is we did this once before. But you know what? We were a different church with different constituencies when we did this once before. And that's another way to remind people that we are called to do new things as God always makes things new. And I think we are now going to break and conversation.
Have a break for 15 minutes, and then we're going to come back for our third session.
Beautiful. And we're all here to chat with you if there's ideas about scary new things you want to invite your folks to do.
So I'm mindful that we got a little bit of a late start after lunch. So I'm going to ask you, we're supposed to go to 3:30, and if you need to leave because you need to leave,
that's fine. But I think we're probably going to go closer to 4. So do what you need to do for your safety and health. But I think we're going to probably go a little longer than we anticipated, if that's all right with y'all. We got a little late start. Take 15 minutes. Such good work.
We're gonna say, we can try something and
Yeah.
learn from it.
Yep.